All right, so just bring it on the screen here. We're going to start talking about the telephone systems. When you have a telephone connected to your home, if it's something that's called a landline, which basically it's a POTS line, all right? So those telephones were very popular. This type of telephone service was very, very popular, and pretty much it was the only, for the most part, telephone system that was used commercially and for residential purposes. Now, if it's just for your home, you could have one line and that's it. So you could have a same line connected to your kitchen phone, to your living room phone, to your bedroom or basement, and it would be just one line, all connected in parallel. So you could use this line as to make the telephone conversations. Now, when it comes to using two lines, things are becoming a little bit more complicated because well, you would need to have two telephone sets, maybe one in the kitchen and one in the living room, and maybe the one in your bedroom would be another line, or you could have two lines connected to all the telephone jacks in the house, and you would have two telephone sets basically on your coffee table or nightstand or whatnot. Or there would be telephone sets that would let you choose the line that you want to use, and it would be just those push button switches, like selector switches. They would be like mechanical switches. So that was the thing to use up till late 80s, mid beginning of 90s still. Then, but then again, already in parallel to that idea, when it comes to business or business setting or commercial use, you would have something that's called telephone system, right? And the telephone system would be a box, a physical box that would act as an automatic traffic controller for all the telephone communications going in that company that you would be in. Right? So let's say the company employs 5 people, and everyone would have the telephone on their desk. So you would get a box or a telephone system, as we said, that would involve lines coming into that box, and there would be extension lines going to each and every individual telephone set on people's desk. Right? And in that box would also serve as other things, like for example, you could have something that's called music on hold would be connected to it, and it was for the most part in the earlier days it would be just a radio headphone jack, headphone output of the radio receiver, or some tape deck at that time. Right now it could be MP3 player. It would be connected to the input of that box, or the telephone system. And if somebody was put on hold, then the music would kick in. Right? There would be also other features that would be involved with the telephone systems. We will go over some of that today. Right? Features as well, you're pretty much all familiar with the idea of call forwarding, which means you can program your cell phone to forward your calls to some other telephone number. So if you don't want to be bothered, you're in a meeting or something, you can call forward your all incoming calls to your voicemail, or you can call forward your all incoming calls to another number. So if somebody dials your number, your phone doesn't ring because you're in a meeting, it rings to maybe your receptionist or something like that. Right? Call transfer, very popular feature. The receptionist would answer the phone and somebody would say, can I speak to so-and-so? Yeah, give me a second, let me transfer your call. So that would be called call transfer. The call transfer could be done by a human operator, or it could be done automatically by pressing having the choice of pressing number 1 for so, number 2 for so on, or whatnot. So the telephone systems were big, are still a big part of, or integral part of any small, medium, or especially large company. Without that, the voice communication would be pretty much next to impossible. Because at your home, if you had 2 telephone lines, 2 POTS lines, you can manage that pretty easily. Right? But if there's a big company and if the company has 100 incoming lines or 50 incoming lines, This phone system distributes the extensions between 200 people, for example, then having just those POTS lines without the telephone system would be pretty much impossible. You would not have 50 telephone sets on your desk just to see which line is ringing, right? So that's why we utilize things that are called telephone systems or key service units, or sometimes PBX, our private branch exchange, and we will talk about that. Now, what do we see here on this screen? This telephone system here is by Nortel Meridian or Northstar Meridian. We have one of those connected and up and working in the lab. So if you want, you can just walk up to it and play with that. We have two telephone sets connected to it. If someone is interested in going in details as far as how to program or the whole structure of that thing, we're there. We can show you that, all right? Or you can just play with those telephone sets. Press buttons, go nuts with it. You can't break it, all right? There's no way you can, unless you smash it against the floor. Yeah, okay. Now, this system here is capable of, it's called 616, all right? So that means it's capable of 6 incoming POTS lines and 16 extensions, 16 telephone sets that could be distributed over the offices or whatnot. So that's called, this one is called Northstar Meridian 6x16 or 616. There's also a smaller version of that that we do have, that, but I have to find power supply. Maybe we can interface that. I have to find a power supply to it. We can connect that as well. But this is the same thing, except this one is called 3x8. So it's capable of connecting 3 incoming lines, POTS lines, and distributing the phone extensions into 8 individual telephone sets. This one was very popular within the up to the late 90s and 2000s. Excuse me. Well, it was implemented in small business situations, right? This one also here, small business as well, but if you need a little bit more capacity, right? Now, there's another version of the same thing, and it's a modular version of that. So you can add the modules and connect and interface them with each other, and you could just plug in the cards that you could just give you the capability of more incoming lines or more extensions and so on. Right, so this is the open version, expanded version of that, and this is the pretty much basic, with the doors closed. That's what it would look like hanging on the wall. Right? And these are the individual, something that's called proprietary telephone sets. What's a proprietary telephone set? A proprietary telephone set is a telephone set that works only with this box. Right? You can't use that one that was made for this telephone system, this particular model of the telephone system, or particular brand, because this phone would work with this, that, and the other, and this one as well, right? It's like a generic telephone, but it's a proprietary. In which way? It only works with that. You can't plug that into a POTS line and expect it to work. It just won't understand the signal. So that's why it's called proprietary telephone set. Right now, there are different models, some of them more basic than the others. Of course, that came with the price, and the more expensive ones would have more buttons. And there's that display console as well that would sometimes be interfaced together with maybe this big telephone. I think it's 310, model 310. But don't quote me, I'm just quoting from my memory. And then this display console would sit right beside that that phone set, so it would be in the reception setting, right? And the receptionist would have those buttons programmed as features or maybe individual extensions and so on. So it would be easier to transfer to somebody than just pressing a button instead of dialing somebody's extension. Also, the display console would give you the indication whether somebody's on the phone or not. There'll be like a little light lighting up there. And over here we have the distribution, cable distribution or pair distribution system. There are different distribution platforms. Some of them are called 66 blocks. And this one here that we see on the screen is called BIX, B-I-X. system. There are some 110 systems, and the other one used mostly in UK would be Cron, K-O-R-N-E, right? Cron systems. They're pretty much the same thing. This installation displacement connection, you put that pair into those grooves that contain the isolation displacement connection, the IDS, and you would use the punch tool to insert that wire in there. You have used already the IDC connection when we were doing the 110 punch down jacks, right? So we will go a little bit over more detail when it comes to that. Actually, if you watch the video on terminating 25 pair cable, you're going to know pretty much, not all you need to know, but you're going to know a lot when it comes to routing the wires using those blocks here, those termination strips. The termination strips help you organizing the wiring so it's not like a mess. And while you have wires organized or pairs organized, then you can easily maintain the system, whether it's adding or subtracting lines or troubleshooting. Right? So that would be why do I call it conventional system? Well, I call this conventional systems because these are the systems that involve the POTS lines, and it's not like an analog. Well, sometimes they would call it analog phone system. That means that uses analog lines or those POTS lines. But for the most part, when it comes to distributing the signal between that telephone system and the individual sets, that signal would already be in a digital form, all right? Quite often, all right? So, so those are conventional system as opposed to VoIP, which we'll cover next. And VoIP stands for voice over IP or voice over Internet Protocol, and it's a little bit more complicated, or maybe not. Well, more complicated as far as design, but using well, in some cases it will be less complicated because quite often you just connect that phone into the computer outlet, and the phone works as a computer or PC or something, except it doesn't have a monitor and keyboard, just a traditional monitor and keyboard, but it has a handset and a display, right? So it works as a phone. But we will cover that next. Right now, we're going to cover the conventional telephone system, as I call. Now, here, let's just go over some features that that can be involved, and I'm going to introduce you to some of the telephony terminology, because if you get yourself a job working in this field, and chances are that a lot of you will, right? There's a lot of room to expand when it comes to structured wiring or network cabling. It's not just running wires and connecting them to terminals. It's also installing systems, and with installing systems, that means you just have a chance to learn how some of the systems work. We're just talking about the telephone systems, but there are also other systems. Will be school PA systems, there will be hospital nurse call systems, fire alarm systems, security alarm systems. There are all kinds of systems, HVAC systems. It's all involves some sort of wiring, knowing how the equipment works, and setting it up, programming, and troubleshooting and servicing it. Right? All right. So when it comes to telephony, right, it's a good idea for you. It's not nice to know. It's pretty much have to know idea that when you're working in this field, you should know some sort of a terminology that is involved with that. So the first, I just chose some. The list goes on, but some of the most popular terms that would help you to kind of exist in this kind of field. Right? All right, so first term here was the CO, stands for central office, and we talked about that last time. We know what central office is. Originally, it was the building that would involve people being in there and directing the phone calls. That would be the early telephone exchanges, or also known as central offices. So right now, the terminology kind of stack. So when it comes to a telephone line, sometimes in the field you will hear a term that is called a CO line. central office line. CO line is basically a POTS line, right? Plain old telephone service line, right? One pair telephone line, CO line, central office line. Also is known as SL, as single line. Right? So sometimes when you hear about SL telephone set, right, which means it's a single line telephone set. It's a POTS telephone set that understands the POTS signal, and it connects to single line, which is known as CO line, or also known as telephone line or POTS line. Same thing, no different names for that, right? Okay, so from that, I'm just going to jump into something that's called rollover telephone lines. What the idea of rollover telephone lines is this. Let's say a company has ordered, well, 4 telephone lines. Can we write this thing right? Yes. Line 1, line 2, line 3, and line 4. These are POTS lines, right? And let's say line 5. And the idea is that the company has requested from the telephone line provider, for these 3 lines here to be included in a rollover sequence. Okay? Each of those lines, telephone lines, has a phone number assigned to it. And these are each individual distinguished telephone numbers that each line has. Now, when the company would publish their phone number, because let's say the company has ordered 4 telephone lines to be in a rollover sequence, they're not going to publish all 4 numbers. What if the company has ordered 50 lines? In the phone directory, are they going to publish all the 50 telephone numbers? No. The company will just publish 1 telephone number, right? And so what happens is that one of the numbers, probably one that's easiest to remember or the nicest looking one, or the most comfortable one, would be chosen as the published number, and it will be programmed by the telephone company that provides the service for you. Over here in Ontario, well, southwestern Ontario, we have Bell Canada that's dominating the whole telephone service. But if you went to western provinces such as Saskatchewan, Alberta, TELUS is quite popular there, and so on. In the States, would be AT&T, yeah. Anyways, that phone number would be published as the main. One of the phone numbers will be published as the main published. So if you pick up, if you can have a phone connected to one of those lines, like let's say line number 1 is the one that's published, okay? And the whole thing is in a rollover sequence. If somebody picks up the line 4, dials out, let's say dials your cell phone number, you would get the number displayed, not the number from line 4, you would get the published number displayed. Why do we have the rollover sequence? Well, if somebody calls in, right, and none of the lines are busy, the company just opened the doors, it's 7 o'clock in the morning or whatnot, there's no phone calls yet, right? So all the phone lines are open for business. Somebody dials the published number, which is line 1. Well, line 1 is going to ring on the main reception. Now, let's say the receptionist transferred that call to somebody somewhere in the office. So that line is being taken right now because that person is talking to somebody on that line. Some other client calls in the same published number, but this line is busy, so the system is going to jump into the next available line, all right? And if that line is busy, it's going to jump to the next one. If that line is busy, it's going to jump to the next one. If that one is busy, hopefully that one is going to become free, or one of those is just going to just keep rolling until it finds a line that is available, right? Now, if all of the lines are busy, well, then the client is going to get a busy signal, but it's a less of a chance with more lines than with less of the lines, all right? So that's the idea of a rollover sequence. Now, and then line 5, for example, could be assigned to a fax machine, right? So whenever the technician would be servicing or installing a new service, you would have to know which line is which. And if you were working for Bell Canada, or if you're working for the major telephone provider, then you would have all the information. But if quite often what happens is that there's a lot of third companies, and if you're working for one of them, then the client or your company would order the lines from Bell for the client, and you would just go and connect it. So the telephone provider would just go and connect those lines to the demarc point or demarcation point or point of entry. Demarcation point is point of entry, which means it's usually in some sort of utility room or LAN room or something like that, or electrical room. Okay? So then your job would be to go in, find where the lines are, and usually they would be labeled with a little tag hanging on the string, right? Or there could be they could be punched into a Bix block or termination strip, and there will be a piece of paper saying, line 1, blah, blah, blah. Or sometimes those numbers, those labels fall off, or somebody forgets to label them. You need to know which line is which, right? Which we're going to talk about next. Because remember, you can't because you need to know which lines are supposed to be connected to the phone system, so it phones in people's phones or the receptionist phone. Right? And there will be one line that stands out that is not supposed to be connected to the telephone system, is going to be directly connected to, let's say, fax machine. Or there could be another line that is connected to security alarm or fire alarm or something else, right? So you need to know which number is which. How do you find out which number is which if you don't have the labels, right? Well, there is a way. So when all the rollover lines would be connected to the PBX, which is basically private branch exchange, which also could be called as key system unit or key service unit, which is the box, the telephone system that hangs on the wall and directs all the traffic for the telephone lines. Right? So those rollover lines, they would have to be connected to the PBX or KSU, whichever way you want to call it. Usually, if it's a small setting, the smaller telephone systems would be called the KSUs. And the bigger ones, like for example, instead of lawyer's office that they have 5 offices or something like that, as opposed to a hospital when they have 200 offices. There will be private branch exchange. There will be more tendency to call that system a PBX rather than KSU, but it is the same thing. It's just one tends to be bigger than the other, but it is the same thing, KSU, PBX. In a bigger scenario, you might want to call it PBX. In the smaller scenario, KSU. Right. So if you want to know which lines connect to the KSU, for example, you need to know the numbers. But how do you find out what the number is? If you get your diagnostic telephone set, sometimes it's called the BAT set. We'll talk about the equipment later on, but this is the telephone looking like thing that hangs from the tool pouch, right? And it has bunch of different connectors that you can just tap into a line. So if you tap into line 4 and you dial your cell phone number, you're not going to get the number from that line, you're going to get the published numbers. So we need to be able to find out what the numbers are. So that's where it comes, the ANAC number, right? Automatic Number Announcement Circuit. The ANAC number is, for example, and there are different procedures in different parts of the world. I'll tell you how it is working here, right? And how it's working somewhere else, you just have to find out. And if you get yourself a job somewhere, the other technicians will tell you how to get the ANAC number for certain companies, right? So with Bell Canada here, it works like this. You'd have to know the area code you're in, right? So let's say we're in area code 519. So you would tap into that line with your diagnostic set, and you would pick up that line, right? You would dial the area code and 958-2580, and you wait. The automatic circuit is going to pick up, and the machine on the other side is going to tell you You're calling from 519-123-4567, right? So basically, that's how you find out, and it's going to tell you the line that you're tapped into, not the published number. So that's why it's very useful. It's a very useful feature. Problem with that arises when you're having dry loops. And it's a dry loop, remember, is a telephone line without the voice capability. So there's no dial tone on it. There's only a DSL signal, which is the digital subscribers line, which is the internet, because some people order that. Then you have a problem, right? And when that comes, you have to have something that's called a DSL analyzer. It's another piece of equipment that you plug in, and it can display that to you, and you have to use it. You have to know how to use it, or but not too many companies. Not always you're going to have that with you. So sometimes you come over there, the lines are not labeled, and you're going to say to the client, "I'm sorry, but the lines are supposed to be labeled. We're going to have to call the provider to send their technician and basically label those lines physically, because we have to know which one is which." All right, so yeah, but for the most part, when it comes to just POTS lines, this is how you find out by using something that's called the ENIC number. As an example of a service call would be, sometimes I would have service calls like that in my days when I was working in the field. The problem was that well, the clients are complaining that when they call our number, they get a fax line, right? Or something that has to do with not proper lines being distributed, or they dial our fax line and they are not getting the fax machine connected. They're getting it rings at the reception. So sometimes it involves a little bit of detective work, because quite often when you get the service call descriptions, the job descriptions or the problem descriptions, you don't know who receives that, and that person who receives the call from the client, they might not be as knowledgeable as the person who is going to service that. So sometimes you're going to get different vague descriptions of this. So when you arrive, you have to play a little bit of a detective to find out what the problem actually is. And when they examine, so quite often what will happen is that line one, the line that's supposed to be in the fax, connected to the fax machine physically, it will be connected into the PBX or KSU, and that one, it will be connected to the fax machine. And so basically that a quick rundown, just dial all the numbers that are active, and find out which ones they are, and then you have to find out what is the fax number. So that will be the one, I found out the fax number was connected to the PBX, and that's why, and one of the lines was connected to the fax machine. Just reroute that cross-connect wiring, kaboom, here's, $200. I don't know if it's $200, maybe less, for the service call, right? Or if it was somebody's fault that works for your company, then, hey, you bite the bullet, right? Okay, so now we know what ENIC number is. KSU, we just explained that. POTS, we know what these are. POTS stands for plain old telephone service. Tip and ring, we have gone over that in the during the last lecture. Just as a reminder, when we're talking about telephone pair, we're not going to talk about two wires, one red and one green, or one black and one yellow. We're not going to talk about positive and negative. You're not going to talk about plus and minus and any of that. When you work with the telephone system, you're going to talk about tip and ring. And if you don't know what that is, just go back to our previous lecture. All right. One is positive, one is negative. ATA, analog telephone adapter. A very popular piece of equipment. What happens is that, remember when we're talking about the proprietary telephone sets, which means they are also known as the system phones, right? So when you have a Toshiba telephone system, you would have to have the Toshiba telephone sets that work with that box, right? If there's a Panasonic telephone system, you will have to have Panasonic telephone sets that plug into that box, and they are going to understand the signal. When it comes to North Star Meridian, same thing. right? But what if, for some reason, you need to connect some equipment that is supposed to be part of the whole telephone system, and that equipment involves the POTS type of a signal. It could be regular POTS telephone set, which would be the telephone that you buy in local hardware store somewhere, that understands only the POTS signal. So if you plug it into the telephone system that is not POTS on the other end, it receives POTS as telephone lines, but the extensions are in the proprietary type of a signal. But you need to connect one of those. It could be a lobby phone that you need to connect, or it could be some phone on the production hall that gets bumped and hit and scratched. So if you need to replace it, you don't have to pay $400 every time. Or for whatever reason. Also, there could be other equipment that is working with the POTS signal. It could be a door station. Right? Some of the door stations are being mounted on the posts at the truck entrances. When there's loading trucks coming into the facility, if it's a bigger one, the trucks come over to the gates, and the gate has to be open for them, and they would press the button on something that's called a door station, which would be on the post, raised up so they don't have to get out of the truck. They just push the button to call in. And those so-called door stations are working with the POTS protocol, right? So then you can't connect that into the telephone system, right? Because it doesn't understand POTS on this side. So that's where we employ something that's called the analog telephone adapter, right? The ATA is being plugged in, and those ATAs, there's not like a one set ATA. If you just like go to the store, distribution store, so do you have ATA adapters? Yes. Can I have two? Right? It doesn't work like that. It's just like going to a shoe store and saying, do you have shoes? Yes. Can I have two pairs? Right? Those ATA adapters work with the specific type of equipment. So if there's a Panasonic telephone system, then you need to have that Panasonic from the same company ATA adapter that plugs into that phone system. Right? But all the ATA adapters on the other side, they have a POTS outlet. So you can plug in a regular telephone set, and you can use all the features of if you were having the system telephone that works with that system, except you don't have those fancy buttons, but you would just have to press maybe star or pound or combination of buttons to get those specific features to go to like an all call page. You would have to press, I don't know, maybe a *01. And the system understands, connect me to the paging system, and so you can do an all-call page, right? So that type of equipment needs to it goes and it basically connects to the other side of the ATA adapter. So the ATA adapter makes it possible for the telephone system to be talking to a POTS type of a signal. Right? Another equipment that uses POTS protocol is something that's called a paging interface. Right? Do we have a paging interface here? Maybe on the next page. A paging interface is another box that connects to the big box, right? And that paging interface also, again, is made for a specific telephone system, and usually it's made as accessories, optional accessories if you want to buy with that particular phone system for that particular company that manufactures it, right? So that paging interface connects to that, and the phone system, the box, thinks it's a phone, right? Because it's kind of cheating itself, trying to tell, I'm gonna make it think that I'm a phone. So that's fine. They will be talking, and it's going to transfer that into the signal into the paging routing the paging signal. So the paging interface connects between the telephone system and the amplifier. And the amplifier is connected to a bunch of speakers, just like the ones that we connected during Lab 2. Right? So the receptionist or anybody that uses the phone system can press a button that says page or punch the feature number like *07, *01, whatever it is, right? And that would access that, or just dial the extension, because the paging interface also can be connected to extension, to make think that this is a phone. You dial the extension, paging interface picks up and gives you a confirmation tone to which you're going to react. And depending on how the paging interface is programmed, you're going to either to talk right away, or if there's some zoning involved in the company, then you have to press the zone number that you want to page, or if you want to page all call, you just press the all call button. Everybody gets the page. There's a fire, get out. Something like that, right? Or why do we have zones? Let's see that there's a huge company, and the company has a little bit of office area, right? So there'll be one zone. The company will also have a shipping and receiving area. It could have some manufacturer plant. It could have some other department of the manufacturer plant. So if anybody would do like a hallway page or all call page or page to speak through the speaker system, then everybody would hear all the pages, and not necessarily it would be for them. Like, for example, the office people, they don't need to hear everything that's going on in the shipping and receiving department. It would be so annoying. They wouldn't be able to work, right? So if you want to just page the shipping and receiving, and in that company it would be solved that it would program as zone number 5 or something like that. So just pick up, press 5 for the zone. So that's why we have paging interfaces. Now, can we use that paging system without the paging interface? Yes, we can, because some of the telephone systems, they have just a paging output. Right? It's just a paging output from the box, and it connects straight to the amplifier. So it's an audio output. But that's usually in a small type of a scenario. Right? If it's a bigger one, then it's a good idea to use paging interface. And how are these being solved? Sometimes, depending on what kind of interface that is, there's not only one kind of interface. It's a paging interface, but there are different kinds. One of them could be receiving the audio signal, and you would have multiple outputs, that those outputs are connected to different amplifiers that power up different sets of speakers. Right? That could be one. Or you could have one amplifier connected to the output of the paging interface, and then the paging interface would have outputs that are connected to the speaker lines. Right? So then inside the paging interface would just decide which ones to include and connect it to the amplifier. One way or the other, right? Depends on what kind of paging interface that is. So ADA adapters are the liaison kind of boxes that translate the signal from whatever the telephone system is, the protocol, to a POTS line, because the paging interfaces, door stations, and auxiliary ringers, whatever else, they are programmed, they're made by many other companies. And it's just the way it is, that just so things are not confusing, most of them are being programmed and made to work with the POTS type of an input, right? So that's why we use the ATA adapters, or ATA. Well, ATA adapters is like analog telephone adapter, right? But sometimes you're going to say ATA adapter or ATA box or ATA. Right? Right. So that's it for as far as the ATA adapters. Battery present. We talked about that already last time. It's kind of a review from that. Remember the POTS lines, they have their own power supplied to them. Those POTS lines are independent from whatever the power circuitry is in whatever the building. So if the power goes out in the neighborhood, the telephone lines, there's a huge chance, almost 100%, that the telephone line is going to work independently. And you can use your telephone providing that your telephone does not need to be powered. Right? So there are just single line telephone sets. The simplest POTS telephone line sets are the ones that you don't need to plug into the wall to make it work. Right? They just use the power that is provided by the telephone line. So sometimes you're going to have a service call that you say, there's no dial tone on that line. Well, okay, it happens because at the CO or the central office or the telephone exchange or local telephone exchange, those lines are plugged into different type of circuits, right? And one of the circuits is supplying the power over that. And another circuit that's superimposed on that line would be a dial tone. So let's say this dial tone circuitry failed for that line, but there's still power. Right? So when you were troubleshooting that, you would say, okay, is the battery present? That means, is there a voltage there? And there are ways to measure that. Right? So if there's battery present, that means, what does that mean? That means that the line is probably intact from the house to wherever it goes to the telephone exchange, to the CO, and it's probably the circuit, the dial tone circuitry has failed, right? Or if there's no dial tone and it says the battery is not present, which means there's no voltage on that, that means probably there is a break in the line somewhere, So that's, troubleshooting is a bit of a detective work. Okay? So that's the terminology says, is the battery present? Okay? RJ stands for registered jack, and there are RJ11s, RJ12s, and so on. You have already seen some of that, but we'll talk in more details later on. Trunk. What is a trunk? A trunk is a cable that that has a lot of telephone lines in it. Right? So the 25 pair cable could be considered as a trunk. Kind of yes and kind of no. Right? Because usually a trunk would be, the trunk lines would be installed in the telephone exchange on the provider type of side, right? So if there was a telephone service provider that services the city, right? And inside that whatever the facility that they have building, they would have trunking, they would have trunks. So let's say there's a huge telephone exchange and there's a trunk wire that goes out and it services that neighborhood. And there's another multi-pair cable that is considered as a trunk, and so this trunk services the other neighborhood, and so on. So that's trunking. Okay. Right, so here's that first part of that. We're going to go and talk about some other features here. Well, pulse and Dtmf. Right, so here's the pulse type of dialing and tone type of dialing. Right now, you're used to hear the tones when you press the buttons. There are certain type of tones that you can hear when you press a number on the handset. So this is something that has to do with the tone dialing. Right? Each number has two tones associated with that. And there are two specific tones, two specific frequencies that are going to be present when you press that button. Those two specific frequencies are going to be received by the dialing circuitry. And when that dialing circuitry hears that two specific tones, it's going to interpret that as number 3, for example, or number 7, whatever it is. Right? The reason why we have two tones for that is that the numbers cannot be dialed by accident. Let's say you pick up the phone at your home and there's a TV playing, and TV could have music going on or so. And see, by accident, if there will be that one frequency that the microphone picks up, it could be picked up as a number. It could create a mess. So that's why when we have the tones associated with the frequencies, they have to be two specific ones, and then the circuitry makes no mistake about it. Right? We used to kind of play with those phone lines, trying to break the tone, break the dial tone. Right? How do you break the dial tone? Well, you start dialing. Right? As soon as you press the first number, the dial tone is broken, and it's goes silent, and the circuitry is waiting for next number to be pressed. Right? So it would just pick up the handset and it would try to make some weird noises with different frequencies, trying to make two notes at the same time. Hopefully that we could break the dial tone. It was a fun thing to do. I know. I have video games. Right? But what does let's okay. So we know that we know the Dtmf, which is tone type dialing, and it says dual tone multi-frequency dialing. So I just explained that to you. Now, what's pulse type of dialing? That's the older version of dialing. Remember you can see in the movies, the old rotary phones, right? You press the rotary dial wheel, you put your finger where the number is, and you rotate that dial until the finger stop. Happens, right? Then you release and the dial returns back to the original position. And while that it dials, it's the timing, how far you push it, depending on the number, it's going to create pulses, which is basically just interrupts the telephone line, and so on. Right? It's longer type, it takes longer to dial, right? Because with a number, you just go, that's it. And it goes, right? So it's like a little bit longer, right? So it's all about efficiency, right? So when you're installing or troubleshooting a telephone system or telephone box or KSU or PBX, sometimes you're going to have a complaint. So let's say we can dial out, right? But once we dial out, for some reason the automatic receptionist or the automatic circuitry is not recognizing the buttons. Let's say that there's automatic there's a machine picking it up, right? Automatic receptionist, automatic attendant, that's what I was looking for, right? Picks up and says, for the hours of operations, press 1. If you want to speak to so-and-so, press 2. If you want to speak to the shoe department, press 3. So they can dial, the automatic attendant picks it up, and they try to choose the options, and it doesn't work. It could be because the telephone lines in the box that it sits at your client somehow are not programmed to be tone dial type of lines, and they are programmed to be pulse dial lines. So yes, when you dial the delivery, right? So when you dial the number, the circuitry at the CO picks up the number and connects you to the client, but it picks up the tones because it understands the tones. And when you start pressing the buttons after that, that system still produces the tone, the pulses rather than tones, right? So then that automatic attendant doesn't understand pulses, right? So it needs to look for tone. So you each have to go into the line programming into that at that telephone system, whatever you're troubleshooting, have to find the line programming section and make sure that the lines are programmed as tone dialing lines, not pulse dialing lines. Right? Ground start and loop start. It also has to do with the telephone line programming. Basically, what it used to be some time ago, that there would be one wire and the other side would be connected through the ground. So in order to initiate the telephone conversation or whatnot, or the telegraph communication, you would use the ground. So it would be ground start. I don't know why some of the phone systems still have the option of ground start versus loop start. In my opinion, they should be all loop start and there should be no option. But for some reason, in telephone systems, there is that option. So you have to make sure that whenever you're programming the lines, they're loop start. And loop is basically 2 wires, which is 1 pair. Right? And then we're not using ground as the return path for the electricity to travel. Right? DOD, DID, direct outward dialing, direct inward dialing. It's a feature that is, for example, when you have a telephone in somebody's office, direct outward dialing. Let's say direct inward dialing first. You pick up the handset, and it could be that you pick it up and you press the button to activate your phone. Usually it's the intercom button. Right? And instead of that, dialing the, no, sorry, scratch that. That's a hotline I'm just describing right now. You pick up the phone and there's a button that is programmed to say, call Jerry at his office. So instead of dialing the whole number of the extension, just press that button. So that's direct inward dialing, right? Or direct outward dialing. You could have a button programmed on that proprietary system phone set that has many buttons, and a lot of them are programmable. You can program that to dial your favorite, I don't know, fresh water supply or something like that, or garbage disposal, right? Or whatever the cover. So it could be a number that you call a lot, right? Then you could have that. So that's outward dialing. So it selects outside line, dials out, right? And then it comes with the hotline. Right? Hotline is, as soon as you pick up the handset, the telephone starts dialing. Right? As soon as you pick up the handset, the phone can be dialing the reception. So this would be in a lobby phone, for example. Pick up the handset, dial the reception. It just dials the reception. The reception says hello, right? Buzz me in, whatever. Or sometimes you can see in some big department stores or restaurants and bars that you would have telephones on the wall, telephone sets on the wall with the taxi companies. And there's no dialer on that. You can't dial any number. Those phones are programmed as hotlines. So you pick up the handset, the telephone automatically dials that particular telephone, the taxi company that has installed that. They pay for it, right? So that's a hotline. Music on hold. We're almost done. Music on hold. It's music on hold. But what can I can tell you a little bit more about that. Because the original idea is when you're waiting for someone to pick up the phone or, let me put you on hold, I'm going to check something, right? So they put you on hold and you listen to some, I don't know, some pathetic music, somebody butchering a Casio keyboard and calling it music, and it's very annoying, right? But nevertheless, it's called music on hold. But there are companies that picked up on the idea. It says, because usually it would be that or like some kind of a music device or maybe a radio. So why not offer, somebody had a bright idea, so why not offer to companies that we can make specific music on hold content for them, right? Specific MOH content for them. So what happens is that, let's say it's a company that sells tires, right? And some telemarketer from that company that provides music on hold service, they would call them and say, look, we can provide the music on, what is it? Okay, so here's the idea. Instead of connecting a radio to the music on hold input of the telephone system, you're connecting another box, right? And usually it's a smart box that connects to the computer network at one end, and at the other end has an audio output that connects to the audio input of the telephone system that says music on hold. Well, problem solved, okay? What does that box have that the other boxes don't? Well, that box is owned by the company who provides the music on hold service. And maybe once a month or once every 2 months or so on, they would kind of talk with each other, those two companies, and say, okay, this month we have special on this, can you just make sure that the client, so they'll provide a long, maybe 2-minute long type of advertising audio file. So the music on hold company would log in from outside into that box, push that file onto it, and log out, and that file, the audio file, would be just looped. So whenever somebody gets put on hold, they hear the specific advertising that's specific to the company. And did you know that this month we have special on those tires that are not black, but they're yellow, right? Something like that, whatever. So that's the idea of music on hold, right? Dry contact and paging interface. Paging interface we just talked about, and dry contact, that's the last thing I'm going to explain to you because we just pretty much hit the time mark right now. So give me a few more seconds here. Dry contact. What's a dry contact? Usually it's a relay, right? What is a relay? A relay is an electromagnet with a switch. So it has electromagnet operating a switch. So, and they're physically not connected. The electromagnet gets activated, it magnetically pulls the switch to close. So when it's deactivated, releases it to open, right? So it's a dry contact. Why are dry contacts? Because some of the telephone systems have dry contact outputs, and those outputs are associated with the page. So if you want to do a page, there's an audio output connected to the amplifier, right? And there's a dry contact connected also to the dry contact input of the amplifier. So when the page is activated, the dry contact activates, turning the amplifier input on. Why do we have that? Well, just imagine having the amplifier with a bunch of speakers, and there's an input that is always active. So when the input is always active, it's going to pick up interference noise. So everyone who is within the vicinity of the speakers, where the speakers are there, the paging speakers, they would hear a hiss or a hum or a buzz or something like that coming from the input. So the idea is to turn the input off, so the speakers are silent, and the input is only triggered when the page is. So the paging amplifiers do have, a lot of them do have the dry contact inputs there. Right? All right, so we're going to finish over here. We didn't go as far as yesterday, but I'm going to post that anyways. This is a repeat thing here. And we're going to pick up on this next time we see each other, which is, I'm not sure, a couple days from now or something like that. I'm going to see one of the sections today for the lab in person at school. All right, so that's pretty much it for today, and I will see you when I see you. Thank you very much.